on page Reish Chaf Hey. So then he goes back to the original thing. He says that in general, there's an association between the Para Aduma and the Avodas Yom Kippurim. So we're holding about a third of the way from the bottom of the page on page Reish Chaf Hey, the third page of your downloads, right after the brackets where it says Moshe Rabbeinu. So he says about Yom Kippur, Ikra Avodas Hayoyim, Achas Bashana, the main service of the day, that it was once a year. It was a unique day. It was a special day. It was different than any other type of day. That was doing the avodah of Ketores in the Kodesh HaKadosh. The specifically through offering and the carbon of the incense. Yud Aleph Samamon, that the incense contained in it 11 different types of spices. What's the significance of 11? This corresponds to, in Klippa, we say there's not 10 spheres like in Kedusha, but there's 11 crowns of Tum. So the number 11 is associated with Klippa as opposed to the number 10, which is associated with Kedusha. So this level of the 10 versus 11 indicate, just like we said about the Para Adum, that the Para Adum is done outside. It's done by chutz. Why is it done by chutz? Because we're dealing with outside. It's the level of tshuva. It's about bringing or elevating the outside. The same thing, the idea of Yom Kippur, the number 11 has to do with things that are outside of the realm of Kedusha. Koil HaChelbana, including also the Chelbana, which had an unpleasant smell, indicating something which is a negative. And when you bring the Chelbana into the Ketores, so then that unpleasant smell becomes transformed to a pleasant smell, just like the Zdonis, Nafle Kazachis of the Baal Tshuva, that the intentional sins that turn into mitzvahs of the Baal Tshuva. Through the Ketores is the refinement and the transformation of the opposite side. And that is, even though it's coming from the outside, but dafka, like we said earlier, that dafka tshuva, that it has to do with bachutz, it reaches to the highest, most level of a ruach toshuv elikim asher nasana, to the level of elikim asher nasana, the high level from which the neshama came from. So that's what he's saying the same thing over here. That the kohen gadol with the ketores, through the ketores, it's possible for him to have this idea of elikim asher nasana, the level of the highest level, lifnai v'lifnim, lebchinas achas b'kodesh hakadosh. That in the achas b'shana he goes into an achas ba'olam, just like it's one unique day of the year and one unique person, the kohen gadol, and then he could enter the most one place, the singular place, the place that's the most holy, the kodesh hakadoshim, when he's dealing with the Yud Aleph, he's dealing with the number 11, which is shows on the outside, and the Chelbana, which is an unpleasant smell. All of this is the idea symbolic of tshuva and the transformation of klippa. When we transform klippa, so then we deal with that highest, most level. Al derech hanal b'paraduma, similar to the idea of paradum. So first, he's bringing an association, a comparison between paraduma and the avodah of Yom Kippur. But of course, since there's a maimer by paraduma, so over here, the Rebbe is going to emphasize how even paraduma has an even greater component. Elosh with paraduma yeshmail, you say and paraduma, there's an even greater advantage in comparison to the avodah of the ketores. That the paraduma is done specifically outside, as opposed to the ketores. The ketores is not done outside. Hainu, this means paraduma roim begoli b'had gosh, by the paraduma we see in a revealed way. And with emphasis, that the idea of the paraduma is about shuva, because how do you see this openly and specifically? Because of where it's located, because of the fact that it's outside. Whereas ketores, yes, we have indications, but it's not as powerful as the indication of it being done outside, like the paraduma. This is also what brought down the Medrash. Part of it, we said initially in the beginning of the Maimer that Para Aduma is the idea of tshuva. I mentioned this Maimer Chazal, but the Maimer didn't yet refer to it. Now the Maimer is going to refer to it, that it says, what is the significance of the Para Aduma? The Para is a mother cow. Calf is the baby. The Egel is the Cheta Egel. So he says, the Para Aduma, the Para is coming to atone and to clean up the mess that her child did. So the Para Aduma comes to atone not just for any sin, but for the sin of the golden calf. It is the root for all the sins. So the Rebbe adds on the top of the next page, I guess because before Matan Torah, the root for all sins was the Chetes Hadas. Once there was Matan Torah, the Chazal say, Paskazum Mason, the tomb of the Yidden left them by Matan Torah, and it only returned after the Cheta Egel. So the fact that the tumah returned only after the Cheta Egel. So in that regard also, that the Egel is also the source and the root for all sins that come after Matan Torah. So therefore, the Para Aduma is such a powerful type of carbon that it is atoning on not just sins, but on the core from which all sins are derived from. Zel Kanal, just like we said before, Para Aduma in Yanahu in that Shuva al Chatoim v'Avonos. That Para Aduma, its idea is the Shuva for different types of sins. This will be understood also the reason why we use the word Zois Chukas HaTorah. What's the idea of Zois Chukas HaTorah? He's not explaining now on the idea of Torah yet, even though we already are going to see soon the idea about Torah. But here he's going back to the topic of Chukah. In other words, even though we explained at the beginning of the Maimer at great length the simple meaning of Chukah, because the Paraduma is called a Chayik, it's a super rational law, etc., etc. But now we're going to explain even more so the idea of Chukas. It's explained to the Torah. It goes on such a level of the engraved part of the Torah. The Torah has three parts. There's the level of the oral Torah, then there's a level of the written Torah, and then there's the Torah that was engraved on the luchas. The level of the written Torah, the oral Torah is completely like outward. We'll mention it a little bit later. The written Torah is, even though you have letters and words on parchment, but still in all, the words in the parchment are two separate entities. Whereas engraved, when something's engraved, it's part of the very stone itself. The level of Torah, or the level of the Yid, that comes from being engraved, like it says, Chatzuvis Metachas Kisei HaKavod, that the souls of the Yidden are hewn out from under the throne of glory, the Rebbe is going to explain that is the source of where tshuva comes from. Because we come from such a high place where we are engraved in godliness, therefore we have the power of tshuva. Let's see it inside. Because the power for doing tshuva on the literal types of sins, not like we said before, hate can also mean a lack and a deficiency, but actual sin that comes from Gimel Satmeis, what enables that? How is that possible to take place? It's only from the level of the engraved level. So first he's going to explain the problem, and then he's going to explain how the Chakika deals with it. And this will be understood by first prefacing the explanation. Madi, so Medrash, what's brought on the Medrash. Domrle Moshe, that Moshe told to the Eibishter, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, Im Nitmazeh, if this person that touched the dead body became Tameh, Bamete Tarase, how will he become purified? At that time, Moshe Rabbeinu's face was darkened and turned colors. In other words, he was like so upset and he was like so out of himself. How is this person ever going to be purified? Kivin Shigila Parchas Paraduma, once Moshe Rabbeinu reached the part. In other words, this happened when he was learning the part of Torah that dealt with the dinim of Tumas Mes. Then when he reached the part of Torah that speaks about Paraduma, so then he was calmed down. Then he was, okay, now I know how he'll become purified, and he wasn't upset anymore. He says the Yidua Diuk Bezat's known the exactness of it. In other words, the examination of this. What is the meaning? What's going on over here? What's the story mean? He says the Mizeshin is Karkamu Panushal Moshe. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's face became darkened, became changed colors. Muchach, it's obvious. Moshe Rabbeinu thought, that's it. He's a lost case. There's nothing we could do for him. He's completely impure. He'll never be able to enter the holy. He'll never be able to eat from kachim. He'll be disconnected from kedusha. Kasha. So the difficulty with this story is, mehechet teisake. Why would Moshe Rabbeinu come to such a conclusion? Where did he take this from? The Maishna, Tumas Meis, Mishar Tumas. Why is the Tumah of a dead body different than all other Tumas? The Kemoshe, Mishar Tumas, Yesh Tarem, just like in other Tumas, there is purification. Gamba Tumas Mes Yikain, also a Tumas Mes. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu was aware that when it comes to other types of Tumah that are of a lesser degree, through a lesser type of contact, etc., there's ways of becoming purified. So why would he say, 1 second, but someone that becomes Tameh, Tumas Mes, there's nothing we can do for them? Why would he come to that conclusion? The idea behind this is the Para Duma Bal Tire Gamal Mata Mata Biyois. Para Duma comes to purify and to cleanse even something that is very, very low. Avia Vaisatum, what's called the grandfather of Tumah, the core and the source of all Tumah. The worst type of Tumah is called the Tumah of a corpse, of a dead body. Shuhu Inyan, Gimel Klipsat Meis, Shalmatim, Klippus Noiga. This indicates the Gimel Klipsat Meis that's lower than Klippus Noiga. Chassidus always identify the idea of life with Kedusha. Since you are cleaving to Hashem, that's why you're alive. Life is all derived from Kedusha. Klippa, by its very nature, is dead. It's just animated. It's just like what they have out there, The Walking Dead. That's what the Rishoyim Afil B'Chayim Krim Mason Rishoyim. Even while they're alive, they are called dead because that's Klippa. Klippa is a dead entity. So therefore, Tumas Meis, in its spiritual component, indicates the idea of Gimel Klipsat Meis, lower than Klippas Noiga. Or Gimel Klipsat Meis Gufa Tachin Shein Tachin Lamata Men. And Gimel Klipsat Meis itself, it's talking about something that's so low that there's nothing beneath it. That's why Moshe's face changed colors and darkened. From the perspective of Moshe, which Moshe, as we know, is B'chinas Chachma de Kedusha. It's the level of Chachma of Kedusha, like it says, Kimir Amayim Shesiu, he was drawn out of the water. Water is the level of Chachma. And also Moshe Rabbeinu said, Vanachnu Ma, that's the level of Chachma, Kayachma. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the level of Chachma of Kedusha. And from the perspective of Chachma de Kedusha, Ein Koyach Levada B'chinas Gimel Klipsat Meis. There is no way, in other words, Chachma de Kedusha is still part of Seder Ishtalshlus. From the perspective of Seder Ishtalshlus, you cannot refine, you cannot deal with Gimel Klipsat Meis. Gimel Klipsat Meis is the worst, and it's so far beyond Seder Ishtalshlus, there's nothing that Seder Ishtalshlus can do for it. So, Moshe, because Chachma de Kedusha, like we mentioned before, Alter Rebbe's Biur Hazor, it's explained, the Masha b'Chachma is berirum, the fact that Chachma, this Zohar says that Chachma has the capability to refine. So seemingly, if it's able to refine, so then it should be able to deal with Gimel Klipsat Meis. That's the idea of refining the good from the bad. The idea of refinement is refining and taking out good from bad and food from waste product. The Rebbe says in the brackets, or the other way, that the Chachma's Berira is about picking out and removing the bad, the waste product from the food. So, so the fact that a chachma could refine, so the Rebbe says as follows: Shehu bechinas birur levad. All that chachma can do is refine and make a determination and separate good from bad, like we will have, like it'll soon bring from the end of our parsha. Now we separate. We say this is good and this is bad. That's what chachma can do. Chachma can put this is in the good column, this in the bad column. This is Torah, this is Tomei. But to purify something that is the impurity involved with a dead body, that fell way down below, lower than klipas noiga. One needs to transform that which is impure to pure. That's not birurim. That's not about setting aside and saying this is beyond the pale. This, you're taking something that's beyond the pale and transforming it. The aim to come in birur, it's not like refining. Okay, and therefore, chachma cannot be a source for this. So Moshe cannot relate to what you would do with someone that would be in contact with a dead body. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu face was darkened. Through the paraduma became also refinement in the Gimel Kubzat Meis. That's in the capability of the Gimel Kubzat Meis to transform from the impure to the pure. Could Isa medrash, like it's brought down the medrash. In Yanahu mi yitin tahar mitame. It says an expression in Iyuv, who will bring pure out of the impure. And Chassidus explains, Hainu shemahapeches as atom milatoir. In other words, what the Medrash associates the idea of the para aduma with the pasuk that says in Iyuv about who will bring tahir, purity out of impurity. The para aduma takes out of the impurity and turns it into purity. And that is something that's a powerful thing that has to be done with the para aduma. So the level of Chachma, the highest level in Seder Ishtalshus, over there, that's impossible. Moshe could not relate to it. So where then did it come from? So therefore, because this capability to transform to the Tamei, to the Torah, it had to come down from a level that's higher than Chachma, because Chukas HaTorah, which is Bar L'Kamon, like will be explained later on. The level of the engraving in the Torah, the level of the engraving of the Torah comes from and within it, meaning the not like we mentioned before. When you write something, so there's the ink and there's the parchment. It's two separate things. But you engrave letters. Engraved letters are from and in the actual item and actual stone that you're engraving it. So therefore, when you have such a high level of Torah, higher than the level of Chachma, but Torah, the way it's in a level that's like engraved in godliness, not from Chachma, so in that high level, even the Paraduma can come about, even the level of transforming Tamei to Torah. Then the Rebbe says, it doesn't just remain in the engraved part. Like many things the Rebbe always says, it's not just in that level, but then it impacts and translates and comes down to the other levels as well. So even though there are lower levels of Torah, and seemingly those lower levels of Torah have nothing to do with the Tara of Paraduma, needs to come all the way from the level of Chakika. So the Rebbe now in the brackets is going to say, but that level of Chakika comes down also into the other parts of Torah. From the level of the Chakika of the Torah, from the engraved part of the Torah, comes down to the written Torah. As simply put, we know the halachas of Paraduma from the written Torah. And then it doesn't just remain in the written Torah, but then in the oral Torah, it's even a lower level than the written Torah, because the oral Torah receives from the written Torah and only elaborates and expounds on the written Torah. So that expounds more on the halachas of Paraduma. So from the engraved part, Chukas HaTorah, the engraving of the Torah, comes down to the level of the written Torah, it comes down to the oral Torah. But where does the power come from? It comes from the power of Chukot. And the Indian Spheres, the level of Spheres, though, it's coming down from the hidden level of intellect of Arach Ampin. Arach Ampin is the lower level in Kesser. Over there, there's a level of intellect as well, not the level of Chachma of Moshe Rabbeinu. Chachma of Moshe Rabbeinu is the level of Chachma Datzilus. Over there, in that level, it could not relate to the idea of Paradum. It cannot understand how we can bring out the level of Paradum in such a type of way that you take the tummy, you turn it into a Torah. But rather, this is a level in Kesser, the level of intellect, the way it's in Kesser. So in Chachma Shebekesser, and even higher than Chachma Shebekesser. The Alter Rebbe says concerning the sanctification of the Chatas waters. In other words, how one puts together and sanctifies and makes the actual liquid form with which we sprinkle the blood, which we sprinkle the paraduma ashes mixed with the water and so on. So the Alter Rebbe says concerning this idea of Kiddush Mechatos, he says as follows: after the Alter Rebbe says over there, quote, in time, that the level of the Kiddush Mechatos is the Chachma Elah, which is Chachma Datzilus, and not just the level of Chachma Elah, but it's actually the concealed level, the concealed brain of Arach Ampin, which is what we spoke about before, Chachma Shebekesser, the Allah Itman Chulum, upon the level of this level, it says, B'chachma is beriru, but Chachma becomes refined. But then he adds an important point. We said before that the Chachma doing the refinement is not enough. Chachma refining is not enough to transform Tommy to Torah. Chachma refining can only separate and say this is good and this is bad. It can't take the bad and transform. So the Alter Rebbe adds to the words of Chachma is beriru, and he says, you're right, it's not enough. And he adds, and the darkness becomes transformed to light. Because that's the main advantage of Moiches Tema over Chachma Elah. Chachma Elah refine of the good and bad of Klipas Noiga, ki im gamis rather also the transformation of darkness to light is doinus nas like the that the intentional sins become like merits. Since the root of the mitzvah of Parah is from this level, therefore it could atone and elevate even the lowest level, not just what Chachmas Beriru, which is the level of Klipas Noiga, where you're refining the good from bad from Klipas Noiga, but even transforming the bad of Gimel Kupsat Meis. The intentional sins of the Gimel Kupsat Meis that's lower than Klipas Noiga. Then the Rebbe says, and he elevates it, he elevates it to a level higher and higher than a level of Zachias. What does that mean? So the Rebbe says a beautiful pshat in other places. He explains, says that by a Baal Tshuva that does Tshuva Ma'avarabba, out of a great love, he does a complete Tshuva, so then Zdoinais Nasa like his Zachias, that the intentional sins become like merits, like mitzvahs. So in the simple meaning, when we say the kid, the like, it's similar to, that means that it's only similar to mitzvahs. It's not quite on the level of mitzvahs because it's lower than mitzvahs. Comes the Rebbe and says an amazing chiddush. Why is it like mitzvahs? Because it's way higher than mitzvahs. Just like we said, the place where Baal Tshuva stand. So even complete tzaddikim cannot stand. So really the mile of tshuva is, since we are transforming klippas shalskat meis, which has a higher shorish and tayu, like it's brought down another Amar Chassidus. So therefore, the oidas that are brought down when a Baal Shuva does Shuva and transforms the Gimel Kipsat Meis to Kedusha, it's much, much higher. So therefore, it's not that the Averis that he transforms becomes mitzvahs. Mitzvahs is too low. It's only kizakis. It's only a level that's like mitzvahs because it's way higher than mitzvahs. And that's what he's saying over here. That because he transforms the Gimel Kipsat Meis, so therefore it's higher than mitzvahs. Al derech shuhu b'avodas Yom Kippurim, similar like the avodah of Yom Kippur, she'az nimshach liyas lach kidvarecha, then it comes down to be, I have forgiven you like your words, kibakashas Moshe, like Moshe Rabbeinu requested that the Eibishter should forgive the Yidden by the Cheta Egel, and this salachti is something that takes place every single Yom Kippur. We have the salachti from the Eibishter. Any questions?
So this
Let's
is,
see. Let me see if I can just squeeze in another paragraph over here, and then we'll open it up to questions. That's what it says in that pasuk. The mitzvah paras yosef b'chutz, that the mitzvah of para is to be made outside. Because it's about refining the three impure clips. The Sefer Mitzvahs Rambam, and the Rambam enumerates the mitzvahs in the Sefer Mitzvahs, not in the Yad Chazaka where it goes into all the details, but where he enumerates all the 630 mitzvahs. He says as quote, that Hashem commanded us to make the para aduma, so that his ashes should be ready and prepared for whoever needs it, to become purified from the tumah of a contact with a dead body. Like it says, will be for safekeeping for the congregation of the Bnei Yisrael. This means the entire idea of the service of the para aduma. It's to be prepared to purify the one that finds himself very much below. It became defiled and impure through the most highest level of tumah. And to elevate into the most highest place. And the power from this is from a level that's way higher than Chacham. This is the reason why in the it says twice Shem Havaya. First it says Vaydaber Havaya, and then it says Havaya. It says this indicates the Yadua Shebachol Malkum Shenimtza Shem Havaya based on the pasuk. Wherever it says Shem Havaya twice in one pasuk, Hapirishu, the explanation behind it is the Hashem Harishon Hu Bezah. The first name Havaya is in Zeir Ampin in the midst. The second Shem Havaya in that pasuk, you're going from below to above. It's going all the way to Arach Ampin, the lower level of Keser, or Atik, the higher level of Keser. The mitzvah paraduma himavaya the Atik, because the root where it comes down, the mitzvah paraduma from is from Havaya of Atik. From there it comes down to the level of Chachma. Leimer, it says this is what Hashem told Moshe. Leimer, what does Leimer means? To transmit it, to tell over, to bring it down. Till comes down the way down below in the place of the grandfather of Tumah to transform it totally to merits. Okay, you had a question.